Joining us now in our D.C. Bureau, Dr. Rahn Bailey, who specializes in behavioral sciences. Doctor, thanks for being with us. I realize it's a very complex question, and there may be a wide variety of factors, but to pose the obvious, why would somebody do this?
Well, it's always difficult for us to figure out. We try our best in post-exams to ask about these activities. Often we find that they have fear themselves, fear of being impotent, being unable to act out and be engaged in effective behavior, fear of being able to get their way, or to be strong or active in all of their considerations.
I would imagine that some of the components would be anger, alienation, a feeling of being disenfranchised. Do those factor into a terrorist?
Clearly, we think that very often these issues of depression and anxiety are substantial. Persons do have irritability and agitation very often, and they feel less able to engage in actions where they can decrease that or dissipate it. Very often they act out in these more violent ways to kind of get back on track. Unfortunately, it puts the lives and risk of other persons at risk.
Are terrorists psychologically normal in the sense of not being psychotic?
They can be. I mean, clearly we find increasingly that persons are not by definition always psychopathic or psychotic or vastly different than all so-called normal persons. At times they can have psychiatric illness. At times they may not at all, but very often they've learned adverse ways to engage in conflict or difficulty.
We know that terror groups screen out, in fact, the emotionally and psychologically unstable people because they're an inherent security risk. But, you know, when a terrorist adopts a cause, do they also adopt a sort of collective identity, being part of a collectivist cause?
Typically, we find that persons actually engage in this behavior, we call it for either cause or comrades. A cause that's bigger than individuals, or some particular problem based on an individual family member or friend or coworker or relative. On issues regarding cause, very often they can be difficult to understand, but we see them increasingly. They might be political, nationalistic. They might be of a religious background, or something that we don't even really know about that is a bit more important to them than to the rest of us. And so difficult to prevent.
Do they convince themselves that violence, especially violence against a government and its people, is not immoral?
We think so. I mean, clearly, for those of us who believe that having morality and ethical values means there's some things you just won't do, or you won't hurt persons who are innocent. Women and children are a classic example. We do think that a person probably has to not give that much value or much importance if they're going to take the risk of striking out in this way. These bombs, for example, were clearly meant to hurt random persons who might just happen to be running by in a marathon at that time or bystanders. There's no definitive target, and that's really what I think spreads greater fear, because all of us think that it could have been us.
And very quickly, my last question, are these the kinds of people who can be very naive and gullible and vulnerable to being unduly influenced, indeed brainwashed, into a cause?
Oh, absolutely. Very often we can see persons who may function psychologically on the fringes of mainstream engagement. They may not be the leaders, if you will, so they're very in their social circle or political circle. So that very often it may be easy for them to pick up on somebody else's idea, so that one leader can actually influence a large number of other persons to engage in these so-called very bad or violent acts.
Always the leader and the followers, and the leader is often the heroic avenger. We'll talk more about it. You're going to stick with us. We're going to come back to you a bit later on in the newscast. Dr. Rahn Bailey, thanks so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
It's one of the most interesting